Welcome back, guys. This is your pal Dr. Sal, and today we're going to take a look at Celexa, aka Citalopram. So we're going to put our stethoscope on it, we're going to take a listen to it and find out what can it do for us and what can it also do to us. As you probably know, as with all medicines, yes, Celexa can make you happier, yes, it can reduce your anxiety, but in some cases, there's also going to be a cost. They ain't nothing free. The chemical name is also called Citalopram, so I'm going to use the words interchangeably. They really mean the same thing. So what we're going to look at here is the eight most common side effects that you can experience with Celexa, aka Citalopram, and there may be other brand names too. So if you've already started it and suddenly you turn polka dot and you wonder, well, is this because of the Celexa? Or you were considering your options and your doctor proffered to you, listen, I think you would benefit from starting some Citalopram, and you wanted to weigh in on, well, what's the likelihood that I'm going to turn green if I start Celexa? We're going to look at that here. I'm going to go through the study that the manufacturer actually puts in a monograph where they studied, I think it was 1,000 people across a 6-week span. What were the most common side effects that people complained about? So let's get to it. All right, so the easiest way to understand it is to use a bespoke pie chart. So I'm just going to draw our beautiful little pie chart here, which, as you all know, will start with a beautiful circle, which is 100% of people. Now we're going to do a little funny math in this because this isn't a true 100%. Anyway, don't worry about that. A few math files. So the first most common side effect we're going to take a look at, which is roughly about 20% of people. So I'm going to call that, it's roughly a 20% slice, or in other words, 1 in 5 people. So 20% will complain of dry mouth. Dry mouth. In most cases, that's not really a deal breaker, but for some people, it can be fairly distressing to constantly have your mouth dry and constantly having to sip water. That's usually at the extremes of dose, so not usually at the introductory bottom level dose, but as you titrate the dose up. So say 10 milligrams wasn't enough, or 20 is the typical starting dose. If that wasn't strong enough and you had to go up, say, to 40 or 50, you might start noticing you're experiencing some dry mouth, which can be annoying, but again, not usually a deal breaker. The next most common side effect, also tying in as a heavyweight 20%. So I'm going to draw a rough, again, these are not perfectly mathematicalized. This is 20% again, I'm just doing it freehand. So another 20% will complain of nausea. Now, in some people, that can be a deal breaker. It makes them feel so sick. Again, however, that tends to be, again, at the extremes of the dose, or when you first start it. Some people feel nauseous, say, the first week that they've been taking it, but the nausea after a few days, a week or two, I've seen this myself in some cases. If the person will pursue it for a week or two, very often the nausea, the brain adapts to it and the nausea disappears. And then you get just the benefits, which is feeling better. Remember, all these drugs, these are designed to make you feel better, not make you feel worse. Actually, that 20% line should have come out a little fatter here. Anyway, don't worry about that. Just imagine this is a little fatter here. All right, the next big heavyweight champ. Do a slice of that. No, I know this is a quarter, but we're just going to imagine it's 5% less, and it's actually a 20%. Again, these are not drawn to a perfect scale. It's just to give you an orientation and give you a feel for the numbers. So another heavyweight one would be feeling sleepy or fatigued, drowsy. That's again 1 in 5 people. In some cases, you can get around this problem. In some cases, it's persistent. So even if you take it for 2 weeks, 4 weeks, you still continue feeling sleepy. Very often, you can get around that side effect by simply, instead of taking the drug in the morning, take it at bedtime instead. That very often will solve the problem as you sleep through the sleepy phase of the chemical. And then when you wake up in the morning, all you have left is just the magic of feeling better. All right, now let's look at some less common side effects. And again, this study was based on looking at 1,000 people across a 6-week span. Now, this again is not perfectly drawn here, but 10%. 10% of people will complain of sweats on it. I generally don't find that to be that common or a deal breaker. I know the manufacturer lists a 10% chance of sweats, but honestly, I would say maybe 1% of people have told me about having sweats on it. So I'm not sure why in their, I guess part of the thing is their study was over a 6-week span, as I just mentioned. Very often I'm seeing people back roughly around that same time frame in 4 to 6 weeks after they start the drug. So I suspect that maybe the sweats are initially, and by the time I'm seeing them again 4 to 6 weeks later, it's already resolved. So I think that's probably why I don't see it very often. All right, another lightweight over here, we can draw another little 10%. So this is 10% again. This one is tremor or feeling shaky. It's actually 8%, but I'm just running it out as 10%. Again, I typically do not see this. In fact, I would say in all the people over the last decade that I've given Celexa to, I've never seen somebody come back and complain to me, "Oh, doc, I've been getting a lot of tremor." So even though the manufacturer lists that one, I probably would ignore it. If there may be exceptional circumstances where people are noticing this, but in my experience, I've never seen this, even though it's listed as high as 10 out of every 100 people. And I've had hundreds of prescriptions for Celexa, aka Citalopram. All right, another 10% is diarrhea and loose stools. Diarrhea or loose stools. And this can be tricky because you see, very often if you're suffering with anxiety, you often get somatic or body type symptoms as a consequence of your anxiety. Some people hold their nerves in other parts of their body. So very often people with anxiety disorders and mood disorders and depression and stuff will also have comorbid irritable bowel syndrome. And with the anxiety type, it often tends to be runny type stools. So how do you differentiate? Is it really the chemical causing the loose stools? Or is it just their anxiety related IBS? So again, this one, I've never seen somebody actually have to come off the medication because their loose stools increase. In fact, I've had some people with the exact opposite. Occasional cases of IBS that I've treated, when all the standard irritable bowel syndrome medicines don't work and they tried probiotics and fiber and all that stuff and it didn't help them, I've occasionally, in fact I can remember distinctly one case where I put the gentleman then on the same Celexa or Citalopram and it eradicated his IBS symptoms. In other words, if you're less anxious, there's less motile drive on the intestine, so you get less IBS symptoms. So again, my experience I find it the exact opposite. But again, I'm just quoting you the stats that the manufacturer provides in their monograph. All right, and now this is another lightweight, 10% in numbers, but in experience, this is like very often a real deal breaker. We're talking about sexual dysfunction, less than 10% of cases. So let me break it down for you. Some people find that they lose their libido, so they're no longer interested in the opposite sex or same sex or whatever they're into. This is not very common though. It's about 2% loss of libido. What is significant is erectile dysfunction in males. Now this is a huge deal breaker for a lot of guys that I've tried out Celexa. I mean, if you're already depressed, what could make you more depressed or more anxious if you suddenly also hit with erectile dysfunction? It almost takes the purpose of the Citalopram or Celexa away. So this even though this weighs in as a lightweight, less than 10% of cases, these two side effects can dominate the decision of whether to continue using Celexa or Citalopram or use a different agent. if you're worried about these two side effects, male or female, my suggestion would be to try something different like Effexor, for example. But that one has a lot of side effect costs too. Or another one would be Wellbutrin or bupropion. I find that typically doesn't tend to cause this as much. So I hope that this dispels some of the myths surrounding Celexa, aka Citalopram, and its use. Remember, there's no medicine in life where there's no chance, no possibility of a side effect. Just walking out through the door into the street, there's potential side effects there too. You could get hit by a bus, you could fall on your face. But generally, the benefits typically outweigh the risks. And it's the same thing for this chemical. So thanks so much for watching. I'll share some more doctor secrets in the near future.
Thanks for watching. Get notified of new videos. Subscribe now.